January 2025. A family of 4 goes to the grocery store and buys the same basket of items they bought in January 2020. The 2020 receipt, $127.42. The 2025 receipt, $187.16. That's a 47% increase in 5 years. But here's what the government says. The official Consumer Price Index claims inflation over that same period was 23%. Your grocery bill says 47%. The government says 23%. Someone is lying. This isn't random. This is stage 5 of a 6-stage inflation playbook that governments run when debt becomes mathematically unpayable. Weimar Germany 1923, Zimbabwe 2008, Argentina 2001, Venezuela 2018, all ran the same 6 stages. Your grocery bill isn't just rising, it's revealing which stage of currency collapse we're in right now. Here's the 6-stage inflation playbook, how to measure your real inflation rate using your own receipts, and what stage 6 means for your money in the next 12 to 24 months. The 6-stage inflation playbook section, the framework. This is the 6-stage inflation playbook. It's the pattern governments follow when they've printed too much money and can't stop. The stages don't happen overnight. They build on each other. And by stage 5, the government starts lying about the numbers. Here are the 6 stages. Stage 1, deny the problem. Inflation remains between 0 and 2%. Officials say inflation is transitory and nothing to worry about. The money printing begins, but prices haven't risen yet. Stage 2, print money quietly. Inflation rises to 2 to 4%. The money supply expands. Stock markets boom. Housing prices surge. People feel wealthy. The problem is hidden by asset bubbles. Stage 3, supply shock blame. Inflation jumps to 4 to 7%. The government blames external factors. It's COVID. It's Putin. It's supply chains. Deflect responsibility away from money printing. Stage 4, wage price spiral. Inflation accelerates to 7 to 12%. Workers demand wage increases. Businesses raise prices to cover labor costs. Prices rise faster than wages. The spiral becomes self-sustaining. Stage 5, asset inflation divergence. Official inflation reported at 3 to 5%, but real inflation is 15 to 30%. The Consumer Price Index is manipulated. The gap between official numbers and reality becomes undeniable. Stage 6, currency crisis. Either hyperinflation destroys the currency, or the government announces a forced reset. A new currency is introduced. Savings are converted at an unfavorable rate. Debt is erased. America entered stage 1 in 2020. We are currently in stage 5. Here's how you know. Stage 1, deny the problem, 2020-2021. Section 3, stage 1, deny the problem, 2020-2021. March 2020, COVID-19 lockdowns begin across the United States. The Federal Reserve cuts interest rates to 0. Congress passes the CARES Act. $3 trillion is printed in 3 months. Unemployment benefits are expanded. Paycheck Protection Program loans are distributed. Stimulus checks are sent to households. But here's what officials said about inflation. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, May 2020. Inflation is not a concern right now. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, 2020. I don't anticipate that inflation will be a problem. And they were right, temporarily. Inflation in 2020 remained under 2%. Why? Lockdowns suppressed demand. People weren't spending money on travel, dining, or entertainment. The printed money sat in bank accounts and financial markets. This is stage 1. Massive money printing happens, but prices haven't risen yet because demand is suppressed. The government denies there's any problem because temporarily there isn't one that's visible. Historical example. Weimar Germany, 1919 to 1921. After World War I, Germany began printing money to pay reparations to the Allies. From 1919 to 1921, prices remained relatively stable. Inflation was low. The German government insisted that printing money was helping the economy recover. German citizens saw no alarm signals because grocery prices hadn't changed much yet. Stage 1 is the calm before the storm. The money has been printed, the damage has been done, but the consequences haven't appeared yet. Stage 2, print money quietly, 2021. Section 4, Stage 2, print money quietly, 2021. 2021. The money printing accelerates. Congress passes the American Rescue Plan. Another $2 trillion in spending. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet explodes. It was $4.2 trillion in early 2020. By the end of 2021, it reached $8.9 trillion. The U.S. money supply, measured as M2, increased by 27% in a single year. The largest peacetime increase in American history. What happened to markets? They boomed. The S&P 500 hit all-time highs. Housing prices surged 18% in 1 year. Bitcoin reached $69,000. People felt wealthy. Their stock portfolios were up. Their home values were rising. The economy seemed strong. but inflation started appearing. The average inflation rate in 2021 was 4.7%. The Federal Reserve called it transitory. They insisted it would go away on its own. Historical example, Zimbabwe, 2006 to 2007. In the mid-2000s, the Zimbabwean government printed money aggressively to fund budget deficits. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange boomed. In 2006, it rose 257%. Investors thought the economy was thriving, but it wasn't real growth. It was monetary inflation. Stock prices were rising in nominal terms, but the currency was being debased. Stage 2 creates the illusion of prosperity. Markets rise, people feel rich. But it's not real economic growth. It's monetary inflation creating asset bubbles. But asset bubbles built on printed money can't rise forever. In 2022, Stage 3 arrived, and the government needed someone to blame. Stage 3, supply shock blame, 2022. Section 5, Stage 3, supply shock blame, 2022. February 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. Energy prices spike. Oil reaches $120 per barrel. Natural gas prices surge in Europe. Supply chains, still disrupted from COVID lockdowns, face additional strain. Inflation in the United States hits 9.1% in June 2022, the highest in 40 years. And here's what the government said. President Joe Biden, this is Putin's price hike. Mainstream media. Corporate greed is driving inflation. Federal Reserve officials, supply chain disruptions are the primary cause. Nobody mentions the $5 trillion that was printed between 2020 and 2022. Yes, oil prices rose. Yes, supply chains were disrupted. But supply shocks don't cause sustained inflation without an expansion of the money supply. The money had already been printed. Prices were already rising. The Russia-Ukraine war became a convenient scapegoat. Historical example, Weimar Germany, 1922. In January 1923, France and Belgium occupied Germany's Ruhr region, an industrial heartland, claiming Germany wasn't paying reparations. The German government blamed the occupation for inflation. France is destroying our economy. But Germany had already printed trillions of marks by that point. The inflation was already in motion. The occupation was simply a convenient external villain. Stage 3 is when inflation becomes undeniable. The government needs a scapegoat. Putin, COVID, corporations, anyone but the central bank that printed the money. Stage 4, wage price, spiral 2022-2023. Section 6, Stage 4, wage price spiral 2022-2023. By 2022, workers were feeling the pain. Groceries were more expensive, rent was rising, gas prices had doubled. Workers demanded wage increases to keep up with the cost of living. In 2022 and 2023, average wage growth was 5 to 6% annually. Businesses, facing higher labor costs, raised prices on their goods and services, but prices rose faster than wages. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, were declining. Workers demanded even more raises. Businesses raised prices again. The wage price spiral had begun. The Federal Reserve's response. The Fed raised interest rates aggressively, from 0% in early 2022 to 5.5% by mid-2023. The fastest rate hiking cycle in 40 years. The goal? Slow the economy, reduce demand, break the wage price spiral. The result? Mortgage rates hit 8%, credit card interest rates reached 21%, auto loan rates climbed to 9%. Housing became unaffordable. The monthly payment on a median-priced home was 80% higher than in 2020. Credit card debt hit $1.1 trillion, a record high. The consumer savings rate dropped to the lowest level since 2008. The middle class was being squeezed between rising costs and punishingly high borrowing rates. Historical example, 1970s America. Oil shocks in 1973 and 1979 triggered inflation. Workers demanded wage increases. Businesses raised prices. The spiral lasted the entire decade. In 1981, Federal Reserve Chair Paul Volcker raised interest rates to 20% to break the spiral. It triggered a severe recession. Unemployment hit 10.8%, but it stopped the spiral. Stage 4 is when inflation becomes self-sustaining. Workers chase rising prices. Businesses chase rising wages. The Fed tries to break the spiral by making borrowing painful, but the damage is already done. But here's where it gets critical. In 2024, we entered Stage 5, and this is where the government starts lying about the numbers. Stage 5, asset inflation. Divergence, 2024 present. Section 7, Stage 5, asset inflation divergence, 2024 present. December 2024. The official consumer price index shows inflation at 3.1%. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, inflation is moving back toward our 2% target. President Biden, we've tamed inflation and the economy is strong. But your grocery bills, your rent, your car insurance tell a completely different story. This is Stage 5. The gap between official inflation and real inflation becomes undeniable. How the CPI is manipulated. The Consumer Price Index is not a neutral measure of inflation. It's a carefully constructed formula designed to understate reality. Here's how. Trick number 1, substitution. Bias. The CPI assumes that if steak becomes too expensive, you'll buy chicken instead. The CPI doesn't measure whether you can still afford steak. It measures whether you can afford some form of protein. Your grocery bill goes up 40% because you're buying cheaper substitutes. The CPI says inflation is only 20%. Trick number 2, hedonic adjustments. If a car costs 30% more than last year but has a better infotainment system, the CPI adjusts the price down. The reasoning, you're getting more value, so it's not really inflation. Your car payment is 30% higher. The CPI reports 10% inflation. Trick number 3, owner's equivalent rent. The CPI does not use actual home prices to measure housing costs. Instead, it uses a survey that asks homeowners, what would you rent your home for? This is a theoretical number. It doesn't reflect what homes actually cost. Housing prices are up 47% since 2020. The CPI reports 22% housing inflation. Trick number 4, weighting changes. Food is 13.4% of the CPI basket, but the average American household spends 20 to 25% of income on food. The CPI underweights the categories that have risen the most, like food and energy, and overweights categories that have risen less. Real inflation versus official CPI, 2020 to 2025. Official CPI cumulative inflation, 23%. Real inflation by category, groceries, plus 147%. Rent, plus 135%. Home prices, plus 147%. Car insurance, plus 52%. Utilities, plus 31%. Healthcare, plus 28%. Average real inflation across these categories, 35 to 40%. The gap, official CPI says 23%. Reality is 35 to 40%. Why the government lies, Social Security, cost of living adjustments are tied to CPI. Lower CPI means lower payments to retirees. Treasury inflation-protected securities are tied to CPI. Lower CPI means the government pays out less. Political optics. Admitting that real inflation is 40% would be political suicide. The government isn't miscalculating. They're manipulating the formula to reduce payments and preserve political legitimacy. Historical example. Argentina, 2010 to 2015. The Argentine government reported official inflation of 10 to 15% annually. Independent economists estimated real inflation at 25 to 40%. The government manipulated CPI to reduce inflation-indexed debt payments and pension obligations. Argentine citizens knew their grocery bills had doubled. The government insisted inflation was 15%. This manipulation contributed to the 2015 currency crisis and the collapse of public trust. Stage 5 is when the gap between official inflation and real inflation becomes impossible to ignore. Your grocery bill shows 47%. The government says 23%. They're not miscalculating, they're lying. How to measure your real inflation, Section 8. How to measure your real inflation. You don't need to trust the government's CPI. You can measure your own inflation rate using your own receipts. Here's how. Step 1, create your personal basket. Choose 20 grocery items you buy regularly: milk, eggs, bread, chicken, ground beef, apples, lettuce, rice, pasta, cheese, butter, coffee, orange juice, cereal, tomatoes, onions, potatoes, carrots, cooking oil, and 1 snack item. Choose 5 fixed costs: rent or mortgage payment, car insurance, utilities, electric and gas combined, gasoline, weekly fill-up cost, and phone bill. Total, 25 items tracked every month. Step 2, record prices. Monthly, save your receipts or use store apps that track purchase history. Use the same quantities each month: 1 gallon of milk, 1 dozen eggs, 1 pound of ground beef. Keep it consistent. Track the same brands at the same stores. You're comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Step 3, calculate your inflation rate. Use this formula: current month total minus base month total divided by base month total multiplied by 100. Example, your basket in January 2020 cost $450. Your basket in January 2025 costs $662. The increase, $662 minus $450 equals $212. Divide $212 by $450. Multiply by 100. Your inflation rate, 47%. Step 4, compare to official CPI. Official CPI from 2020 to 2025, 23%. Your real rate, 47%. The gap, 24 percentage points. Why this matters. This is your inflation rate, not the government's model, not a theoretical basket, your actual expenses. You can't argue with your own receipts. The data is right there. This exercise shows you how much your purchasing power has actually declined. It reveals CPI manipulation using your own spending data. Tools to help. There are inflation tracking apps available. Some banks and budgeting apps offer tracking features. You can also use a simple spreadsheet, Google Sheets or Excel. Create columns for each item, record prices monthly. The formula calculates automatically. This is a 10-minute monthly exercise, but it gives you the truth. You don't need to trust the government's CPI. Measure your own inflation with your own receipts. The truth is in your grocery basket. Stage 6. What comes next? Section 9. Stage 6. What comes next? Stage 6 is the endgame. The currency either collapses or the government resets it. There are two paths. Path A, hyperinflation. The currency loses value exponentially. Prices double every week, then every day. Historical examples: Weimar Germany, 1923, Zimbabwe, 2008, Venezuela, 2018. For the United States, the probability of hyperinflation, 10 to 15%. Unlikely, but possible. Path B, forced currency reset. The government announces monetary reform. A new digital dollar, likely a central bank digital currency, is introduced. Old dollars are converted to the new currency at an unfavorable rate. 10 old dollars for one new dollar, or worse. The government's debt is erased. Your savings are destroyed. Probability 70 to 80%. This is the more likely path. The timeline 2025 to 2027. Stage 5 can last anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Warning signs that stage 6 is approaching. Official CPI manipulation becomes so obvious that even mainstream media can't ignore it. Foreign central banks begin dumping US dollars aggressively. US Treasury auctions fail. Nobody wants to buy US government debt. The Federal Reserve is forced to choose between hyperinflation and a controlled reset. What's stage 6 looks like? The government announces a central bank digital currency as modernization or efficiency. The conversion rate heavily favors the government. Your $10,000 in old dollars becomes $1,000 in new digital dollars. The national debt is reduced by 90%. Your savings are reduced by 90%. Gold, land, and productive businesses survive. Cash savings do not. Historical example: Germany, November 1923. In November 1923, Germany introduced the Rentenmark, a new currency. The conversion rate: 1 trillion old marks for one Rentenmark. Savings were wiped out, but the currency stabilized. Those who owned land and businesses survived. Those who held cash lost everything. Stage 6 is the end of the currency. Either hyperinflation destroys it, or the government resets it. Either way, cash savings become worth far less. The only question is when. Your grocery bill is a warning section 10, the payoff. Here's what your grocery bill is telling you. In January 2020, a family of 4 spent $127 on groceries. In January 2025, that same basket costs $187. That's 47% inflation in 5 years. The government says it's 23%. That gap isn't a mistake. It's stage 5 of the inflation playbook. Stage 1, they denied there was a problem. 2020 to 2021. Stage 2, they printed $5 trillion quietly. 2021. Stage 3, they blamed Putin and supply chains. 2022. Stage 4, they raised interest rates to break the wage price spiral. 2022 to 2023. Stage 5, they manipulated CPI to hide real inflation. 2024 to present. We are in stage 5 right now. Your grocery bill shows 47%. Your rent is up 35%. Your car insurance is up 52%. But the government reports 3% inflation. They're lying because admitting the truth means admitting the currency is failing. Stage 6 is when the currency either collapses or gets reset. Based on historical patterns, that window is 2025 to 2027. You can't stop stage 6, but you can prepare for it. Measure your real inflation. Track your own basket. Use your own receipts. Know the truth before the government is forced to admit it. Because when stage 6 arrives, the people who prepared will survive. The people who trusted the official CPI will lose everything. If you want to keep tracking the real economy, the numbers they don't want you to see, subscribe. Because your grocery bill isn't just a receipt, it's a warning. We're in stage 5. Stage 6 is coming. The only question is, will you be ready?